time in a rhythmic rhyme.
Hey.
Low. Watt is a measure of power. Yes.
Yeah, but you sound kind of weak, Anthony. Weak. Speak up and enunciate clearly. You're loud and clear.
Yes. Brian is strong and Herr Anthony is weak.
And you're live. You're going to need to do the greeting. I'm not Mike. Hello. Welcome to the Ea Tolkien Society here in sunny Spokane, Washington, in the western hemisphere of the world, not in the Third Age, but in actually February the 11th, and we are glad to have you with us. If you are online and joining us right now, or you watch this later on, Maya Govanen. I am Brian Huseland, the secretary of this particular Smial of the Worldwide Tolkien Society, and I am glad to be here. Why don't the rest of you go ahead and introduce yourselves? Yep, today is February 11, 2023.
Hello, my name is Anthony of the East Farthing, and I've been a member of the Ea Tolkien Society here in Spokane for, unofficially, I guess, for about almost 6 years now. And I officially joined the international branch of the Tolkien Society, I think at the beginning of 2021, so I've been officially a member for 2 years.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
And magic powers. And a badge-wearing volunteer of the RPG Research Center, it looks
Yes,
like.
indeed. I'm a level 1 GM volunteer trainee.
Badges? We don't need no badges.
Yes, we do. Turns out we do.
Yeah, actually we do. Great.
Just not the police-ifer type.
Wonderful. I'm feeling a little thin today with my...
Yes,
See
you
if we
seem a bit transparent. We can see right through you.
Apparently you can.
Oh my gosh.
Just call me the Green Man.
Or four-dimensional man.
Oh, you know, when you wear your Celtic Knotwork shirt and then forget that you're going to be recorded on a green screen background. So,
Yeah.
well, and welcome Hawk, the founder of Tolkien Society here in Spokane, as well as, let's see, Hobbit Talk Radio, or Middle Earth Radio rather.
Middle-earth Talk and Raw Hobbit.
Raw Hobbit, and a contributor and co-founder of the other Hands and Other Minds? Which one is
Yes,
the one you started?
I was the founder of
Yep.
Other Minds magazine.
Yep.
Yeah,
Which
Tolkien Morinsky's co-founder. Yeah, he's kept it going.
yes, he has.
Yes, he has.
Most recent issues have been out in December.
Yes. Very
And then online, go ahead and introduce yourself for those who may be watching that haven't met you guys before.
Chris?
This one's good.
Greetings from the South Farthing, where it is almost 55 degrees and sunny.
Oh,
And
jealous.
I'm Chris Cooperstein, and I've been part of the Tolkien Society for coming up on 10 years, and just still connected to the group, even though I moved away 2.5 hours to the southwest of you.
So, Anthony and Brian, that right there. If you
And
look
I'm
at the
even,
left,
I'm
is
even
the
further
chart, if it-
away than
Okay.
Hoop is.
What's that, Gary? Go ahead.
I said I'm even further away. I guess you could play
Will you be here
against
for
me
much of
and
it or not?
maybe the other side of Elliott or something. Anyway, I live in Mountain Home, Idaho, and I've been attending these Saturday afternoon
No, just
events for, what, a year and a half now? Something like that. And I'm also a member of
We'll catch up
the
later.
Tolkien Society.
appreciate it.
And glad to be here.
Yeah. Good to have you, Gary. Welcome. And may the hair on your toes never fall out.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's interesting.
Well, that's a straight up from The Hobbit, right?
Oh, it is? Okay.
My podiatrist says not to go around barefoot anymore.
Oh yeah, that's true. I guess you gotta toughen up your soles, right? If you're gonna tramp around in the Shire. So, well, it's good to have you all here, and I am thankful to be in the company of such admirable Tolkien enthusiasts as all of you. So again, if you can't hear one of us, just please let us know. But it's good to be able to join each other in person and online. So welcome. Would anybody like to read the notes for the last Tolkien Society meeting in January? If not, I can, but otherwise I'm happy to let someone else do that.
Yeah, why don't you?
Brian,
There were crickets chirping.
Yeah, I can't find them.
Okay, that's fine. Well, last month we met in January 21, and we had Chris, Gary, Brian, and Anthony attending.
Ah, here we go.
So we're back to much acclaim, I'm sure. So we talked about, basically Anthony read notes from December, and we had a discussion on those notes, and there was much rejoicing, and in the land of Nador they were forced to eat Robin's minstrels. That, of course, is a reference from Monty Python. That actually did not happen last month, but I just wanted to point out that there was much rejoicing as we had a good meeting in January. Secondly, more seriously, Anthony refers to a new book coming out on the Battle of Malden. And so the link is there in the notes, so you can look online and find those. Chris referred to a rumor of Tom Bombadil being a cameo, at least, or more, in season 2 of The Rings of Power from Amazon. Plus, perhaps Celeborn may show up. Rumors, but juicy rumors nonetheless. We hope they're both true. Also, Chris mentioned the I think it was a metal album. Is that right, Chris? Unconscious Mind of Arda. I did have a look at that. And that just came out in January. So that's a fairly recent album of metal, and it's inspired by the Middle-earth legendarium. Gary made comments on the Battle of Hastings, since we were talking about the Battle of Malden, wondering about the Battle of Hastings, and then we discussed how that was less than 100 years after the Battle of Malden. So the Battle of Malden coming from the time period in England when it was still very much an Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking society, but before the Norman conquest. And then I pointed out that there is, in terms of news, there is a new Other Minds magazine that came out at the end of December, so that link is there for those who enjoy exploring the world of Middle-earth through role-playing. There's a lot of good resources there connected to, most especially, The One Ring, or I should say The One Ring and also AIM. They still have some resources for Adventures in Middle-earth, which is the D&D version. The One Ring is a different role-playing system. But those are both, there's different creative kind of modules and scenarios that people can use if they want to. That's not everybody's cup of tea, but some people enjoy that. And then we segued into kind of the comparative part of our meeting, as we've been going over for the last, I think, 6 months or more.
Wow.
Comparing, just as a way of giving some structure to our meetings. First, what were the people, the modern fantasy writers in the last 50 years that Tolkien has had an effect upon since his death? And actually this year is 50 years since Tolkien passed away.
Yeah.
In 1973. So, it's just good to kind of reflect on all those that he's influenced, whether intentionally or maybe some people, wanting to not be like Tolkien, and that is still an influence.
The anti-Tolkien.
The anti-Tolkien. And then we kind of moved backwards to those peers and people in his kind of literary ecosystem, right? And most notably the Inklings, but others as well, like W.H. Auden, for example, other writers at the time. And then we started looking backwards at those writers who had an influence upon Tolkien. And it seemed to make more sense to kind of go way back and then work our way up to Tolkien. So that's what we did. And what was it, 2 months ago? We looked at ancient sources, mythology, more like the Egyptian and Greek kind of influences, looking at that. Also the influence of Christianity, the Old and New Testaments. And then last month we read and compared a little bit of Livy's History of Rome, Ab Urbe Condita. Tolkien had a deep sense of history, including Roman history. This influences his writing as a pseudo-historical work in which he is able to give it the sense of a feeling of history, doesn't it? Right?
Yes.
And so he's able to draw on his background knowledge to make it feel that way. And he also, Anthony had shared that Tolkien studied classics for his undergrad work, which I thought was really interesting. Did you find out anything more on that?
No, I didn't, but I remember just reading his biography, I
Okay.
believe by Humphrey Carpenter, that he started out, I guess, majoring, quote unquote, in, Greco-Roman literature with the classics.
Sure. Kind of required back then if you were going to get into languages, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm sure he got it at, he also got that sort of education at King Edward's Grammar School, or whatever sort of grammar school he went to.
Definitely would, yeah.
But then he decided to switch to Norse, Scandinavian, Anglo-Saxon literature.
That's right. That's right. The feeling of the North, as it were, right?
Yeah.
Some of those. Okay, and then we moved on to Virgil, the Roman writer who wrote the Aeneid. Am I saying that correct?
Yep.
Finally,
Yes.
I have pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, for now.
But Virgil, his writings were referring to Aeneas and Troy as well. Was it dealing with the Trojan War?
Yeah, the Aeneid is set after the Trojan War.
After the Trojan War.
Yes, and it
Yeah.
features Aeneas, who's also featured in the Iliad as kind of a background character, but here
Right.
he's the central character who is fleeing from the aftermath of the Trojan War
Right.
and making his journey first to Carthage in North
Yes.
Africa and eventually to Lavinium or Italy to basically found the Roman state.
Right, so it's really kind of a backstory to the Roman culture, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah,
or
sort of a
maybe a backstory for how it got founded.
a mythological
A
foundation.
mythological foundation. That's right. Okay, and so we were looking at some parallels. One of which was that I noted that in the Return of the King, in the books. So in the Return of the King, you see the point where Pippin and Pippin. That's right. Pippin is with Beregond and then his son Burgle, and they're actually watching people coming in, kind of before the orcs lay siege to Minas Tirith. You see these people coming from the fiefdoms, the southern reaches of Gondor, and it names them by their leader and then how many they bring. And this one brought so many hundreds, this one brought this many, and that was similar to so as you look at the captains entering Minas Tirith, this is similar to the list of ship captains in the Aeneid, as it does the same thing. You have such and such a captain. I have not read that section, but I did find the reference to this as I was listening to the podcast, The Prancing Pony. So that's interesting too. We read about Ovid, the Roman poet, and his book of poetry, Metamorphoses, on change, and found the connection of the sense of just of gravity and grandeur that is an Ovid. The myth, the background, that grandeur definitely pervades Tolkien's stories, and so many poems that Tolkien wrote. I mean, really, if you take out all the poetry from Tolkien's works, even The Hobbit, which wasn't in a sense a full-fledged kind of epic story or anything, it's still embedded throughout, isn't it?
Yeah, and don't forget the Lays of Beleriand, which Tolkien obviously didn't publish it in his lifetime, but it was a poetic retelling of some of the stories in the Silmarillion, which is really fascinating.
Absolutely.
You have a chance to read that.
And I wonder really how much is only told in poetry. When you look at some of the things that the Lay of Leithian, you have a prose version, but there's bits that are told only through the poetry, and so
right. Yeah.
it gives us kind of a window, a different sort of window into his imagination. So good stuff. We talked about how do we view the classics nowadays compared to maybe when Tolkien was growing up. You mentioned the grammar school; those are almost all gone. And so there's just this shift in thinking, are they worth knowing? And we had a good discussion about how they are worth knowing about. And so really appreciate Anthony's background and knowledge, a lot more of a background than I have.
Oh, thank you.
And then Chris, you chipped in at that point talking about how it's still valuable for kids to know classics nowadays. And today we'll kind of have a chance to say, is it worth people growing up learning about Beowulf? I mean, one of Tolkien's points that we'll look at is it worth saving? Is it worth preserving? And so that's kind of, even though not part of the classics, which are usually referring to the Latin writers
or Greek
writers, certainly almost as far back.
Yeah.
And so for us, kind of part of that same corpus of Western writing. And then finally, for our notes, just wanted to point out that we talked, Anthony, you mentioned that Tolkien referred to man falling from a state of purity to corruption. This was when we looked at Augustine, or
Yes.
Augustine, who was a late Roman writer and early church father. He wrote Confessions, which was the first autobiography, and also the mammoth work, maybe his magnum opus,
The City of God.
The City of God. His worldview had a huge influence on the Christian church and Western civilization as a whole, including Tolkien as a Roman Catholic. And then finally, we read, after that discussion, we read Letters to Tolkien 2:12. There was a discussion of the Valar, the creation of Arda with Iluvatar's words Ea, or he said, let it be. I don't think he actually quoted Ea in the letter, but he just used he said, the let it be, which in Elvish, I believe it's Quenya, is Ea. Elf-centered mythology of Middle-earth. That what we see in the Silmarillion is an elf-centered mythology. The views of death, parallels to Christian thought and inspired by it, but ultimately different and unique as a sub-creation of Tolkien. The next historic influence upon Tolkien will be Beowulf, and it was decided that the Tolkien Society will start meeting again on the second Saturday of the month to be less in conflict with RPG research training and making it hopefully easier for Anthony,
Yes.
who will have probably training next week at this time, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So
Every Saturday.
Hope that helps you, buddy.
Thank you.
Anyway, and our next meeting of the Smial will be on February 11th from 1 to 3 p.m. at the RPG Research Center. Those are the notes. Any comments on the notes from last month?
No, but am I the only one who can't hear Anthony when he talks?
Hello. Can you hear me now?
I think the question is whether Chris can hear him, because if so, then that means that maybe you might need to turn up your speaker, Gary. What about you, Chris?
It's a bit faint. I can hear him, but it's a bit faint.
Yeah. Yeah, Gary, if you could turn up your speaker,
Yeah,
maybe.
loud, Brian.
Okay.
Okay, I will try to be a little quieter, and
Yeah.
Anthony will try to be
Loud. What?
Sorry there, Anthony. I'm sure it's the technology that's
Yeah.
not being cooperative.
Indeed.
So not your fault. Yeah. Okay. So I think Tolkien was probably soft-spoken, wasn't he? Except when he was teaching, he was probably.
Yeah, if you look at it, if you listen to him in interviews, like he kind of stumbles his way through speech, and yeah, some YouTube video creators have to put subtitles under in his video when he's
Subtitles. Is this guy speaking American?
American, man. I'm an American.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny. Subtitles. Maybe I'm just used to fifth graders mumbling, so
Yeah.
it's easier for me to hear it. But it does help me when you speak clearly, all three of you, because I am hard of hearing, and that's just the way it is. Okay, so any other comments about the notes from last month? Okay, what we usually go to next then is just a few housekeeping things. First of all, I bear you greetings from Corey, who can't be here because he's working today.
Yeah.
And then also from Sara in Italy, fair Verona.
Yes.
But she has a another Tolkien-related event tonight, so she can't make it.
Wow.
But I did let her know that we've moved the meeting to the second Saturday of the month. And which just makes me think, Chris, you know this reference in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where Governor Gumpus says to Caspian and company, no appointments except on the third Tuesday of every month, between such and such and such and such a time. And I feel like hopefully we won't lose anybody by moving it to the second Saturday. But anyway, we'll hopefully get people back on track with the new date.
Except on party business.
Yes.
That's right.
No admittance except on party business.
Anyway, I don't see any comments in the YouTube chat, so I'll keep an eye on that just in case somebody ends up watching us. But as always, it's good to remember that even if no one else is watching us, that does not change the value or significance of what we're doing, but just can extend it to those who, well, as of course right now, we're very glad that Chris and Gary can join us, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to meet unless, of course, we were to travel to Mountain Home for a meeting, which I'd be down for anytime. Gary, do you have room for us?
Yeah, but you gotta sleep in a tent in the backyard.
That'll work. Maybe not in February. We could always try a summertime. And then of course,
It's cold here.
yes, I'm sure it is. It's maybe August, huh? And then Chris, you've got space. We just have to make sure it's not in the horse pasture, right?
Yeah, in the garage, in the barn, on the Murphy bed, wherever.
That's right. Well, anyway, we're glad to have you with us remotely. As far as other housekeeping, I think that's pretty much all I had to bring up. I did want to just have you guys thinking about something, and I'll mention this to Hawk as well. I think it'd be good for us to kind of think a little bit about what our mission is. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of the Ea Tolkien Society? Hawk has done such a great job of getting it going and keeping it alive. And we've come in, at different times to kind of join it. So we're part of that. But I really think it's important to just ask, because we've had people come through before who thought, oh, great, we're going to just read the books a lot, and we don't actually.
Yeah.
So that's different. I mean, there's some limitations to recording online.
Yeah.
You can't read huge long sections for copyright purposes, but you can get around that by skipping parts, and reading other bits. There have been people that have come through in the past who really love the movies, the Peter Jackson movies. And so that was their entrance into the world of Middle-earth. And they might have come in on a month when we were talking all about role-playing.
Yeah.
And although Anthony and I are, we love gaming.
Yes.
We understand that's not for everyone.
It is not, no.
And I feel a little sad that maybe we've lost some people along the way who are like, oh, well, these guys are about role-playing in Tolkien, and I'm not really a role player, so I don't really want to be part of this. I feel like that we don't want to, it's good to mention it for those who are interested in it.
Yeah.
But that can't be the core, I think.
No.
But we're thankful, of course, to RBG Research Center for letting us use the space and their studio.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome. They kind of enable the Tolkien Society, and Hawk has a great long history of Tolkien being kind of, as it were, kind of the influence on much of what he does, and really even role playing. So
Yeah.
it is connected, but we want to make sure that how do I put this? It's so easy in derivative works of based on Tolkien for it to get pretty far afield, so that
Yeah.
you're not really studying what the professor wrote anymore.
Right.
It's like well, I'll wait until the news when we get to that, but I have something that I think will illustrate this point. Anyway, so can we all just think about this, and then in March, I think it'd be very appropriate for our March meeting right before the destruction of the ring, right? Because that's when March is always the anniversary of the destruction of the ring
Yeah.
in Tolkien's calendar. But it'd be great for us to talk about, hey, just as that signaled a new age in a new epoch in Middle-earth, maybe we can reflect on what is our purpose. What do we most enjoy? What do you enjoy, Gary, about meeting, and what could we do more of? What are your thoughts, Chris, on how we could continue to make it interesting to you? And then what have you enjoyed in the past, Anthony, that maybe certain meetings that have been really great and enjoyable, and hopefully we can make that more accessible to more people while staying true to what we are. So that's my pitch for kind of revisiting our purpose.
Can I interject something, Brian?
Oh, please do.
And anyway, how many people know about the Smial, about our meetings, Tolkien scholars every month?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we do really.
And that's,
Go ahead.
And I thought of something because I don't know how you gentlemen feel about Facebook, but I was on it. Right now I'm in Facebook jail, and I have no idea when they'll let me out of it. But so the most I could do is there's quite a bit of interest on Facebook with different, it looks like different sites or something like this about Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, the new Amazon TV series and stuff like that. But somebody could just mention that, this is available, out of Spokane every month, and we meet on the second. Now we meet on the second Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific, which would be 4 o'clock Eastern. And, go from there. If anybody's overseas, then they probably can figure that out, because they probably do that all the time. But I'm wondering if I sent those things around, if and again, I don't know how you feel about Facebook, but just to make people aware that it is available and would increase our participation.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you've got to, I think that the difficulty is that we have no one who's really dedicated to that. Hawk is busy with other projects that he has to be involved in. And I totally agree with you. I mean, it's something I could do, or maybe one of the rest of you would be interested in doing, because I think it wouldn't be necessarily a lot of work, but I think it's just getting the word out. And we have platforms, but I think it's not about that really. I think it's more about just getting out of our silo and letting people know about us.
Yeah.
So that they're like, oh, really? That's great. I mean, I can think of I think we need to do better at realizing what's going on in the fandom.
Yeah.
And then reaching out specifically to key areas that we think will have a lot of overlap with us, who are, I mean, I can think of several just off the bat. I'm part of things. I'm more of a lurker, I mean, I'm not super involved in, but people who would be interested, in that. I mean, there's a British history podcast. Now that's not related technically. However, there's people on there who might be interested in Beowulf, or so there's a lot of intersections there. We could definitely do that, and certainly for anybody who's been interested in following either the Lord of the Rings or the Prancing Pony podcast or the Rings of Power or anything related to Signum University. I don't know. We'd have to be careful in that some of these websites, they don't want people just going on there and spamming them with ads for, come see my website. But if it's related, I think there would be sympathy for that. Like, oh, hey, that'd be really good. So I think maybe it should be, I don't know, maybe the youngest member of our company should look at that and give us some advice. So
I'd go for that.
because I'm not sure I would be willing to help, but I don't know that
I'm the oldest, so.
the most wise and experienced, of course.
Indeed.
Indeed. So thanks for that. I think those are good comments. Does anybody else have any thoughts to add to the discussion on either how to promote ourselves or our purpose?
Yeah, I think that's
As Tolkien was one who did not promote the Inklings per se. I don't know. I suppose I'm a curmudgeon.
I'm gathering the sense from you, Chris, that you enjoy this group of people talking over these things, and you don't feel like there's anything missing from that. Is that right?
As it mirrors the Inklings, no.
Right. That's fair. Any other comments, Anthony?
Yeah, I'm sort of in between. Like, I think Gary's idea is interesting because we haven't really done anything in terms of quote unquote recruitment when it comes to like ourselves. But on the other hand, though, it's nice to be able to kind of meet with like-minded individuals who are familiar faces. Because I see Tolkien Society as primarily a literary society, discussing the works of Tolkien as well as his associates, the Inklings, as well as influences upon Tolkien, as well as the authors that he's influenced. So, I don't know, if we wanted to promote this, we just had to be careful about, who we're reaching out to, and as well, I don't know. I mean, I don't.
Do we have enough in common, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do we have enough? The people that we're reaching out to interested enough in the books? Because I feel like we're here to discuss primarily the books as opposed to just the movie. Although we could definitely branch out a little bit to, other multimedia platforms like the movies and the soundtracks and the music, animation.
I think that's all fair because it's inspired by Tolkien.
Yeah.
But as long as we never get more than one step away, I think, from the written text.
For sure.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for everybody's comments. I'll put those into the notes. And I think between now and March, we can just be thinking again about what the purpose is. I'd love it for us just to have a simple purpose statement that we can actually slap on. We do have a website, but I think we need something that's a little more crystallized.
Yeah, mission statement.
Yeah. And just be able to then say, based on our purpose, do we want to try to reach out a little bit more? I think rather than trying, it's not necessarily that we have to have more people. I think what would be great is if there are people who are drawn to Tolkien's written works like we are, for similar reasons, but they don't know about us.
Yeah.
I mean, think about if you didn't know about it, or when you first knew about the Tolkien Society. Oh, really? There's
Yeah.
one of those here in Spokane?
Yeah,
That's
where I
great.
felt.
I mean, I wish there were more of these closer to you, Gary, not because I don't want you to be part of this, but because I feel like there's so many good discussions we have.
Yeah.
I would just dearly love to be able to go out to a pub with all of you and like Chris is envisioning, I think here, each of us having a mug of some beverage or other and to soak our mustaches in, except for you, Gary, but you know.
Yeah, I don't have one.
Yeah, beard.
But anyway, good comments.
I mean, when I found your site and I came on board, I had to go looking for it. You know, if there are Tolkien Society anywhere
Yes.
around, and at first I was hesitant, and which is typical. But I'm just saying that if it was out there a little bit more, you might get some of the same people who are interested, because I've run into people all over the place in my travels, and even when I was stationed overseas, who are really into Tolkien, and probably would be a good addition to the group. And
I wonder too, as we contemplate this for the next month, if we would consider the different aspects of what they call the fandom nowadays. That's not really a word I don't use that as much, but I recognize that my younger friends, that to them represents all these different pieces. And how do we fit into that exactly? Are we basically a book club? Are we here to encourage and inspire each other? I know that's something that Corey really likes, is when we're not just talking about things, but it actually makes a difference in our lives, that it can be of great encouragement, which is part of the reason why probably each of us, for different reasons, really enjoyed reading Tolkien, and it stayed with us all this time, because it's unique, and not every book is like that. We've read lots of books and watched lots of movies, etc., that were enjoyable and good entertainment. So Tolkien is more than that, and so maybe that's going to be part of our purpose too, because if it's in a sense meant to be doing good, to others through discussing literature, then we can include that too. All right. So if there aren't any other comments, we can go on to news. Does anybody want to share anything that they've read lately online or heard about? Chris, do you have more juicy inside scoops on the second season of The Rings of Power?
No, I don't, but I do have other things.
Go ahead.
Oxford University states that on 3 January 1912, that j.r.r. Tolkien was fined £1, 7 shillings, 6 pence for overdue library books
I knew it was that.
in his first year at Oxford. That is approximately £110 today.
Holy mackerel.
wow,
So
what a difference! Jeez.
he is not a perfect person.
And I think he was born on January 3rd, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
So that would have been his 20th birthday.
Happy birthday to you to receive the library fund.
Indeed.
That was his gift.
I'm
Let he who has never had an overdue library book
cast the
cast
first
the
stone.
Here.
That's so funny. What can I ask where you found that, Chris? Where was the source?
It is a general MSN article. Let's see, Business Today desk. So
Okay,
it's probably
thanks.
at MSN UK.
Okay. That looks like India, actually. Is that businesstoday.in?
Yeah, it probably is.
Okay. Just trying to find a good place to source the text?
Second article from The Guardian, dated, when is this dated? Date. Is it at the end? I don't see it at the end either. But anyway, it's on the left panel. 4 February 2023. A refuse firm in Brighton called Lord of the Bins has been ordered by lawyers to change its name after being accused of breaching trademark laws. The two-man waste collection business was contacted by Middle-earth Enterprises, I would assume because they still are in transition, which owns worldwide rights to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings trilogy. Nick Lockwood and Dan Walker run the company, which collects household, building, and office waste across East Sussex and West Sussex. The pair said that they have been issued with a cease and desist notice after it was claimed that they were in breach of well-known franchise trademarks. As well as changing the firm's name and website, they will be forced to ditch their company slogan, "One ring to remove it all."
Yeah,
I don't know why anybody would think that this was in any way copying the Lord of the Rings intellectual property.
I can't see the resemblance.
No, and there's no resemblance at all.
Oh my god. They're just asking for it, man.
Yep. I noticed that their website's still up, so they're enjoying some well-deserved publicity before they have to take it down and rebrand.
Of course.
They've probably been getting thousands of hits.
Yes. And the third article is, I don't know how I missed this earlier, but 29 December 2022, in which the Royal Mint unveils the January 1st, 2023 royal coins that will be in circulation. And of course, King Charles is on the £5 note. But guess who gets the £2 note?
Tolkien?
Celebrating the life and work of j.r.r. Tolkien.
Woohoo! Woo! Huzzah!
Tolkien, writer, poet, scholar, 1892 to 1973, and his j.r.r.T. logo on one face of the coin with around the edge, "Not all those who wander are lost," inscribed on the edge.
I want one.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to be Harry and Meghan, so.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah,
not.
I don't think they're well liked in Great Britain.
Not so much.
You can pre-order these on eBay for $360.
Oh.
It contains 5, 2, and 1, and 50 pence
Yikes.
coins as uncirculated. Or you can ask one of your friends to pick one up that's in circulation sometime this year.
Yeah, I will definitely be hitting up my British friends for that. But you know what it makes me think of is that this is how Britain will survive the fallout from Brexit. They'll just fund themselves through Americans buying maybe these coins. I don't know.
Indeed. This is part of the wealth of a nation, is not just its economic trade, but it is its attractiveness to other cultures in having built a culture which endures despite every other economic woe that is going on around the world.
Well said. Well said. That's a good point. My goodness. I mean, certainly when you think about it, how much tourism do they have because of Shakespeare, because of Yeah.
Harry Potter,
Harry
Tolkien.
Potter. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's kind of an outsized influence, isn't it?
Yeah.
This little island, Fair Albion.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I'd say Japan does the same thing.
yep, that's probably true.
Yeah, particularly when it comes to anime, I reckon.
Yeah, that and
Oh.
cars.
Nintendo.
Nintendo, yes. Um, Gary, is there anything newsworthy that you wanted to report?
No, but I was just thinking about New Zealand, which, other than being on the other side of the world, I mean, they're featuring tours to Hobbiton now. And, you know, you can go have a Hobbit dinner and all this other stuff with all the courses and everything like that, depending on where you go. So, and you can see real Hobbit holes and that type of thing.
Yes, my brother took
They're-
that tour.
They're proud of that, and that's also fallout from the Tolkien thing, and of course, the movies from Peter Jackson.
I heard recently that New Zealand is going into some sort of modified lockdown again, but I might be wrong. I mean, that could be just a.
Well, they've got idiots for leaders. The woman who just resigned, I can't remember her name.
Jacinda
Being
Ardern.
replaced by somebody who's worse, but they had one case of COVID, and they locked the whole country down.
Okay, because I thought they reopened last
This was
summer.
a while ago, but
Didn't they reopen last summer? I thought, but this is
yeah,
recent.
They reopened, but anyway, if they go into another lockdown,
Well, that'll be terrible for
that is
their
not good for the people of New Zealand.
their economy. Will definitely be impacted again, huh?
Yeah.
I can't see anything on here specifically in the news. Yep. So anyway, I think that's still affecting them in politics, if nothing else. Okay. Well, let's move on to another newsworthy piece. And this is, I'll read it to you and then ask for your takes on this. TheOneRing.net, latest article, the one Lego set to rule them all. If you ever wanted to walk through the grounds of Rivendell, it may now be in reach, albeit on a much smaller scale. Lego has announced a new massive and superbly detailed new The Lord of the Rings Rivendell set. The huge model contains 6,167 pieces, 15 minifigures, and is over 15 inches high, which I love them saying. And it's over 15 inches high. That's less than 2 feet. And almost 30 inches wide. It's split into 3 sections with a council ring, gazebo, river, bridge, and more. There are numerous printed tiles and details such as elvish paintings, statues, the shards of Narsil, and Bilbo writing in his book There and Back Again. The entire Fellowship of the Ring are included as minifigures as well as Elrond, and they misspelled it, should be Elrond, Arwen, Bilbo, and more. The set is priced at $499.99.
Oof.
So what are your takes on that? You can look it up if you want while we're talking.
Most overpriced piece of plastic I've ever seen.
Yeah. But, I mean, it looks kind of
I wonder
cool.
how many people are going to step on the pieces.
Riven by Rivendell.
Yeah. It's just, you know, somebody's trying to make money off the Lord of the Rings. Of course, they have to have permission, but
Oh yes, yeah, it's all official.
Lego
Yeah.
probably paid the owner of the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings quite a bit of money
Yeah.
to be able to do this, but they're hoping to.
Oh, they'll make a lot of money on it.
And it's in partnership with Warner Brothers Discovery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Everybody's in on the deal.
Mhm.
Okay, so I have 3 thoughts on this too. One is positive, and then I'll go negative. So the positive is that I I enjoyed Legos growing up. It certainly was a welcome kind of toy to help me build my imagination. The initial vision of Lego comes from the Danish words build or play well.
Oh.
That's what Lego is a contraction of, is legot, which means play well. And the original Christensen family that founded the Lego business was really about giving kids toys, originally wooden and then plastic. They came up with the interlocking patent that, of course, is the foundation of Lego. And it really was about encouraging children's imagination to build things. And I think, like with the Lego movie, what's interesting there is you kind of have this tension, in the story between like building according to the schematics and the plan in the book versus being more like a free builder, right? And I think that's always been there from the very beginning, is that what made it great when I was growing up, and probably for you too, Anthony, like the castle sets or space. They had city, space, and castle when I was growing up. They've, of course, done much, much more. But so there's this positive sense in which they really were about wanting to help children have many opportunities for playing on a miniature scale. Mm-hmm. And I spent so many hours building, recombining things together, making making all sorts of things that were a lot of fun. And I don't know if Chris, if you enjoyed that as much, and to what extent, Gary, for you would connect with that, whether it was for you or if it was more likely for maybe for your kids. But what's interesting to me is and this is when I'm going to turn a little bit more negative, as much as it is kind of an attractive set. It's beautiful. I will say that I'm sure a lot of care went into it. It's clearly modeled on the Peter Jackson movies and on the scenes in Rivendell. So it's that imagination, that's that perspective they're using. But the third generation of the Christensen family, when he was in charge, kind of took it to beyond the kind of different worlds like space or castle or city to more connecting it with brands.
Yeah.
And I think it's really come down to because of the money. They realized that if they made partnerships with with a particular story, movie, brand, whatever, then it would be very lucrative. The initial Legos always had smiley faces, and they never had, it's like, I don't know if you've seen the Lego movie, The Good Cop, Bad Cop, where he can change his face.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there was really no, I mean, as far as bad guys, they obviously wanted to be able to eventually make something that people could play different parts. There's nothing wrong with that and have bad guys, but it increasingly went into merchandising so that the soul of Lego, I think, has really been lost to a certain extent. Now, if kids can play with this, something like it, and be immersed in and kind of lose track of where they are and be pulled into Middle-earth to some extent, that's great. But I'm afraid that all this is another barely disguised attempt at a cash grab. Because look at Star Wars. Look at what happened when Lego paired with Star Wars. I mean, I'm guessing that they probably were pulling in 10 times the amount that Lego had been making before then. So much like Tolkien's own intellectual property, making other people money, I'm looking at you, Tolkien Enterprises, it feels like sometimes people are less interested in the content and just more in how this can make them rich. And again, I'm not against capitalism per se, but it for $500, okay, let's just say that maybe a work this big, it definitely is every bit worth $200. I can believe that. It takes money to create all these. You've got to have all the tiny molds, the dies have to be cut. You have to create specific, unique pieces that have never been used before. They're not going to necessarily be ones they could borrow from elsewhere. But even if you take into account paying all your artists, you could sell this thing for $300. So the fact that they're selling it for $500 just to me is I don't know if I have enough words for it. I feel like it's obscene. But nowadays, I know inflation, like a Millennium Falcon is also very expensive.
Oh yeah,
Right?
I had one of those as a kid.
Yeah. Was it the Lego one?
It might have been a Lego one, but also like I had a huge kind
Like
of
a fully plastic one, right?
yeah, more of a fully plastic
Yeah.
one. And I remember building it with my brother and dad, and that
Cool.
was fun. You know, kind of Star Wars and
And those toys did help you kind of immerse yourself in that world a little bit, right?
oh, absolutely. And I created my own worlds too with other Lego pieces and
Yes.
built and rearranged houses. And,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was definitely a part of my childhood.
See, to me, that still has worth.
Yeah.
But if it's like a classic example is where you have, say, Lego, you can get Lego sets for Minecraft now.
Yeah.
And but that's a world where you're building things. You have unlimited options.
It's
for
a
30
sandbox.
bucks. And then you're buying now a Lego set of this, which has limited. You're limiting the unlimited possibilities down
Yeah.
to a box. But if kids were to take something like this and be able to like add it and do all sorts of interesting things, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
But what parent is going to be able to afford $500? This is
Right.
really for adult collectors,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
right? Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah.
Any other comments or other news to share? Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and go to the main reason why we're here. It's 2:00. Let's devote the rest of our time to Beowulf. And if we don't get to Letters of Tolkien today, I think that's just fine. I think it'll take probably the full time to be able to kind of unpack this all.
Yeah.
As we approach this, there's different things to bring up, and I want to ask for your various thoughts on this, because I think we have to also recognize that we're coming to the text and we're saying, why are we looking at Beowulf in relationship to Tolkien? And so a few books that we need to bring up, for example, so this is The Monsters and the Critics and Other Essays by j.r.r. Tolkien, and it is his case in, I believe, the 1930s on why Tolkien is important, or sorry, why Beowulf is important, and why we need to read it and treasure it, as Chris said earlier, part of England's kind of cultural heritage and wealth. We also have, you want to hold up maybe to a camera there, the most popular current translation of Beowulf from the Old English, which is Seamus Heaney, and that one is widely available. I have it on Kindle, and so you may have a paper copy. And then, of course, we have to make a nod to Tolkien's own translation. This is a prose. I found this interesting.
Yeah.
He did a prose translation of Beowulf, and so that was published not recently, but in the last 10 years, I believe.
Yeah.
wasn't it?
2014, I believe.
Was it 2014? Yeah. So that's also worthwhile knowing about, and so there's more there for people who want to know. And then just as far as background information that I thought might be of use to everybody, I have, because we're dealing with a period of history now it's not Greco-Roman, it's not really related to the Roman world at all or the early church. We're talking about now very specifically England, and so this is the oldest, correct me if I'm wrong, Beowulf is the oldest surviving English epic poem
Yeah.
that we have. So this is about as far back as you can get in written works. There's
Yes.
a lot of oral things and stories, etc., but this is as far back as you can go. So it's kind of a time machine for that. So it's useful to just be reflecting on that time period, like we did last month with Battle of Maldon. This is a great book I would recommend called King Alfred's English, A History of the Language We Speak and Why We Should Be Glad We Do. Again, this is not saying that we shouldn't have loan words from other languages. I think English is a very rich language, very varied. We borrow words from all over the world into our language. But this is a great book which gets you into thinking about Old English itself, and it's the foundation of our current version of English. So it's a great book. And then just a little bit more, one more thing on King Alfred. There's a great biography of Alfred the Great, who, I would say was probably the most important of the Anglo-Saxon kings, although notably not the king of all of England, but he was definitely the overlord or high king, if you will, of all the different English kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxons. But this is called The White Horse King by Benjamin Merkel, Ben Merkel's book. You might be familiar with Ben Merkel, Chris, I'm guessing through classical connections. And then one final book, which I just found about from a friend last week. I was in Seattle and talking to a friend who's a professor at the University of Washington, and a really neat guy. He actually teaches environmental sciences, biology, but he's widely read. And this is a short little book called Breaking Bread with the Dead by Alan Jacobs. And I'll refer to that later, but anyway, it's great because he's basically making a case for why should we read anything written by people who lived a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a bigger, kind of broader topic. And then just two things left that I want to show. This is an actual image. You can find this on Wikipedia, but it's the first page of, I think there's only 2 surviving manuscripts of Beowulf. Is that right?
Actually, I think it only.
one.
Yeah, it's only one.
Only one. So this is that first page, and can you imagine?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine, like many other old manuscripts, if that one that we have had been burned in a fire? And so, really, it's amazing to think that we have even this document that still survived and then was translated. And has anybody ever seen the animated 1998 animated film? It's only about a half an hour long. But I have used this with my kids. So I actually teach, very briefly, I teach Beowulf as a story. We don't read a lot of it or anything. I do read little kind of excerpts so they're familiar with the story so that they know what happens. But this is I would recommend this one, 1998 animated version. I would say it's a PG version, but it's not bloody. It's not super scary. I would recommend it for like 9-year-olds and up. What I love about this one is that it actually quotes from Beowulf as you go through it. So that's worth a look. I've heard that the movies that have been made of Beowulf are really not good. Anthony, have you seen that?
I've never seen a film adaptation, but I've heard at least the most recent one, which was done in the 2000s.
Yeah,
I think it had Angelina Jolie of all people.
It did. Angelina Jolie is Grendel's mother, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Probably, but I heard it was terrible.
Yeah. Chris or Gary, any versions of Beowulf that you've heard of that you?
I saw one a long time ago on TV, and it was, after reading the story, reading the poem all the way through, I think sometimes it was more prose and poetry, but it kind of made things up, like, it's Beowulf kills Grendel, of course. And then he enters, because Grendel's mother is really upset and comes back to, take her revenge. When he enters her lair, somehow he finds out that what's the king of the Danes there had an illicit affair with her, and that Grendel was the progeny because she was a witch.
Right.
It was a horrible movie, but
Yep.
I do remember that.
Yep.
And I can't even tell you what time period.
Yeah. Agreed.
I've only seen the 2015 version, so
Okay.
the recent one.
And what was your impression?
No comment other than it was poorly done.
Yeah.
I don't think this poem it can be properly captured in movie form.
Yeah.
And that it needs to be done in the form that was that you sent a link about. I think that's probably an appropriate form for it.
Right.
That was impressive, Anthony.
Yeah.
What was it? Bagby?
Yeah, Benjamin Bagby. He's kind of like a early music specialist.
Uh-huh.
And he, well, in this particular case, he actually sang and recited Beowulf as it would have been recited in the mead hall by,
I was captivated. I mean, it
You
was
were? Yeah.
absolutely mesmerizing because I've heard people read, pretty convincingly read, the Lord of, or sorry, read
Beowulf.
Beowulf in Old English.
Yeah.
And there's various ones you can find. But he does bring us, like Chris was saying there, into the sense in which it was originally meant to be done.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it's just spellbinding. So I definitely want to go back and listen to
Yeah,
more.
me too.
Yeah,
It's,
so thanks.
it's the true sense of what a bard is.
Yeah, a skald or
What a bard would
Skald.
have done.
Skald.
Scald, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting point on the animated one. What I liked is the nod to the fact that Heorot, the hall, actually means a hart. That's the Old English word for a deer. And at the top of the if you watch this, you'll see the very top of the mead hall is he's basically got a deer's head with the antlers. So it's fun to he's got a little taxidermy going on there. So you might enjoy that as well. And I'll put the animated version in the it's on YouTube, but I'll put it in the notes as well if anybody wants to look at that. Okay, so how do you think would be best to kind of to move forward? We're looking at how did Beowulf influence Tolkien? What do we want to do? Any thoughts on that?
I can go, if no one else minds, I can go into a little bit of the historical background.
Yeah.
And the probable dates of composition as well as the...
If you've prepared a little something, then by all means, why don't you share that and then see if Chris or Gary have any thoughts on that, and we can kind of use it as a springboard. Is that okay?
Yeah, if I can hear him. Anthony, I think we ought to take up a comment on, a collection to get you a new microphone.
Yeah, maybe Brian's handing me a microphone now.
Try that one.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good, great.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
I don't know what Brian's going to do in the meantime, but I suppose we could just pass the microphone back and forth. Okay, so I didn't really prepare anything, but I could just give a background on kind of the history behind Beowulf, and because it has definitely a historical setting. Namely, it's set in 6th century Scandinavia, specifically modern day Sweden and Denmark, kind of that northwestern area of that region. And of course, it's written in Old English, the language of the English people in the first millennium and parts of the second millennium as well. So what's the date of Beowulf? Well, the actual date of composition of Beowulf is a little bit disputed, but it was probably produced sometime between 800 and 1000 AD. I believe Tolkien said it was probably Tolkien himself probably favored an earlier date.
He did.
Because he
The
said
pagan elements.
yes, he says the poem contains too many elements of paganism to not be remembered within that generation.
Kind of like a transitional period.
Yeah. And the date of the manuscript itself, so it survives in a single manuscript called the Noel Codex.
Nowell.
Yes, Nowell. And the manuscript, so far as scholars can tell, was produced between 975 and 1110 AD. And this was around the time, I believe, when the Danes kind of took control of England, and England was, at least parts of England were under what's called the Danelaw. So one scholar favors a date of around 1000 AD during the time of like Canute the Great, if you know who that is.
Yes.
Danish king, but also a king of England at that time.
Kind of a North Sea empire, right?
Yes. So just looking at the content of the poem, it's set in a kind of a heroic time period when paganism was still the belief system of many of the Norse and Scandinavians. The Beowulf poet makes mention of how the characters in the poem would make offerings to propitiate the gods, to try to stave off of Grendel. And the poet kind of interjects that if only they knew the Almighty,
right?
Instead of the fiends of hell or something like that. And,
Which can I interject quickly?
Yes.
You know what that reminds me of, and can you hear what I'm saying here or not, Gary, Chris?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you now. I don't know exactly what happened. You're a little bit weaker, but that's okay. I can hear you. I can make it out.
I'm melting. Well, I'm not weaker. I swapped microphones with Anthony, so I just wanted to interject something related to what you heard Anthony just say now.
Sure.
That reminds me, Anthony, of in reading the sagas. So I'm thinking specifically of the saga where Leif Erikson, in his journey from Greenland to the rest of North America, to mainland North America, like Vinland.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with those.
Yes.
So he discusses something very similar. He talks about how in his crew that went to go explore this land that they had heard of, when they went there were both Christians and pagans among them, because at the time when this saga was said to take place, because of course Leif Erikson was a real life person, this is around the year 1000. I mean, it's literally about maybe 100 years since the introduction of Christianity to the Vikings of Scandinavia.
Yes.
But there's many people still who are resistant to the new faith. But in places like Iceland, Norway, Sweden, there's like internal cultural debates about it. Anyway, sorry, it's one of my pet topics, but
I can tell.
Yeah, but getting into the focus of what I was saying here. So Leif Erikson, in the saga, it talks about how in his crew, there's one guy who was he was a worshiper of Thor, and they were basically looking for food, and they were hungry and not starving, but getting close to that. And he said, "Oh, I found a whale that came up, was washed on shore." And so they cut some of the whale, and they were cooking the meat and eating it. But before they started to eat, he said, "Well, I've sacrificed to my gods, and because he was convinced that the new faith was not good for Vikings, And anyway, everybody who was kind of the same Christian faith as Leif refused to touch the meat. I think this is one of those moments that's kind of frozen, not frozen, but captured in amber, where you have a time period where it's talking about there's a new faith, they're kind of dealing with it, but the old pagan religion was still quite strong. And so at the time when the saga was written, and I know the Eddas weren't written, a lot of sagas were written down in the 1200s, but essentially what you have is older people later on kind of referencing this and capturing a moment where it would feel more fake if they were all like walking on like, oh, we're all Christians, because they knew that wasn't the case at the time. And I'm wondering if that's the same thing here, where you've got the poet who's writing this poem seems to be referring to a time when this was still a struggle or a...
Right. And
would you agree?
Especially if, one favors an earlier date of composition, like in the. Some say the poem could have been written as early as the 7th century when the Christianization of England was taking place still, because I think Augustine of Canterbury would have landed on English shores in
603, I think. No, 597.
597 A.D.
That's right.
On a mission from Pope Gregory the Great to try
That's
to
right.
convert the Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah.
So it does. So it could have been written during kind of that period of transition. So to give kind of.
What did Tolkien-
Sorry, what, Gary?
Tolkien, he thought it was the earlier date, right, that it was written?
Yes.
But
He thought it was sometime during the 8th century or the 1800s.
well,
Either one.
yeah, 7th or 8th century. But certainly others would disagree with that. Is that what you're saying, Anthony?
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a lot of dispute. Those are kind of the dates of the poem. And now, a little bit of historical background before we jump into the actual poem itself. So, the poem kind of features characters and clans and certain events that are actually historical, such as Halfdane, Hrothgar, Halga, Ulf, Eadgils, Othir, but also clans like the Shieldings, the Shilfings, and the Wolfings. And certain events, like the raid by King Hygelac into Frisia, was mentioned by the Frankish historical chronicler Gregory of Tours in his 10-book chronicle, The History of the Franks, which I'm actually reading right now.
Wow.
Very interesting kind of historical chronicle of the Frankish kingdom. Well, that's just sort of a digression.
Huh.
But the majority view appears to be that figures like Hrothgar and the Shieldings of Beowulf are based on historical people from 6th century Scandinavia, so 500s. But it's obviously not meant to be read as a historical work, because features characters like Beowulf, who are more mythological heroes.
Yeah.
And I think, given the didacticism of the poem, like how the author interjects about Christianity and sort of the moral purpose of his work, I think history was probably just more of a subsidiary concern to him rather than
Right.
the main concern. And,
Right.
and Tolkien also,
Like a folk tale.
yeah, exactly. And Tolkien felt that scholars were delving too much into. I think in the Monsters and the Critics, he felt
It does.
that scholars are too concerned with the historical background of the poem and not enough on its literary content and value. So,
Wow. That's almost a whole topic of its own.
Yes.
So you're saying that, I don't want to push you that way. So is there anything else in the context that you wanted to share before we kind of talk maybe a little bit about how people look at Beowulf?
let's see. Well, there's some interesting tidbits about archaeology.
Ooh, tell us.
Yeah. 19th century archaeological evidence may confirm certain elements of the Beowulf story. Eadgils, who's mentioned in the poem, was buried at Uppsala in Sweden, according to Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the Prose Edda. And there's a mound that was actually excavated in that area in 1874, which showed finds that a powerful man was buried in a large barrow, circa 575, on a bearskin with 2 dogs and rich grave offerings. The eastern mound the second mound, was excavated in 1854, and contained the remains of a woman and a young man. And also in Denmark, in the 20th century, there were excavations in Lejre, which is in Denmark, which revealed that a hall was built in the mid-6th century, matching the period described in Beowulf. So,
Ooh.
could have been actually,
The actual
Heorot.
Heorot.
Yeah.
Heorot.
3 hall. Oops.
Can you hear Anthony?
3 halls, each about 50 meters long, were found during the excavation.
So kind of these massive big mead halls.
So yeah, in addition to just the historical setting, there may be some archaeological evidence that confirm that some elements of the story have, kind of a sense of realism or realistic. And we can also go into like the culture of that period, which is probably a little sketchy, but
Yeah, I think maybe would be worthwhile to ask. Go ahead, go ahead, Gary.
Refer back to Troy,
yeah,
and everybody thought that was complete, mythology
yeah,
until the German archaeologists found out the place actually existed.
yeah,
Now,
yes.
As far as the battle, Achilles and
So, yeah.
what's his name? Yeah.
Oh, Paris.
So, yeah, I don't know about that, but this is, I think we see this happening a lot more than we would normally think in, when we start looking at what we come up as mythology.
Exactly, yeah. So what you're saying is some of these myths and stories could have a historical kernel, taking place in a real setting and a real time, with some elements of the real world happening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also it was written in Anglo-Saxon. It was written in English.
Yes. Sorry.
We lost you, Gary.
Oh, Gary, you there? Uh-oh.
Chris,
Chris, are you there?
frozen as well?
Uh-oh.
Hello? Oh, there you guys. You're back now. Go ahead, Gary. What were you saying?
I can hear him.
Okay.
We missed the last 10 seconds.
Can you guys at the RPG Center hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Can you hear us? Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
And anyway, what I wanted to say was, where did they get the idea for the Scandinavian scenes and the characters and everything like that? It had to come down, I think, from an oral history that they picked up. But of course, at the time, you had England was being ruled, or parts of it were being ruled by Scandinavian.
Exactly.
So,
That's a good point.
that's what I think, anyway.
Yes.
From reading the thing.
Yeah, Chris, any comments on that?
Yeah, not on that topic, but I read a fair bit of The Monsters and the Critics this morning and had some observations.
Yeah, let's come back to that. Let's circle around in just maybe about 2 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I continue?
Brief comment.
Yeah, sure.
Can we talk about that audience? Gary brought that up about who was it written
Yeah, that's
for.
what I was going to get to.
Go ahead.
So don't forget, the Anglo-Saxon people themselves were immigrants from northwestern Germany, and the Angles, the Jutes, and those other peoples would have come from Scandinavia itself, the setting of Beowulf. And so really this scholars conjecture that Beowulf was a poem really written for an English audience, but the poem was about their ancestors. And so sort of like how we like to read tales of our ancestors in America, and maybe even beyond, like in England or something. Beowulf was, a poem specifically composed to be performed that would have recounted to the English audience, the tales of their Scandinavian ancestors. So we just have to bear that in mind as we read the poem, that, this wouldn't have been too foreign of a tale for them, because even though they were Christianized in somewhat, they would have kind of picked up on certain elements that would have been familiar to them, like certain aspects of culture, or the setting, and the way the ships were constructed, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as the American colonies before the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
The colonists thought of themselves as British,
Right.
And in every sense of the word.
I think there's definitely a parallel to be drawn there. And even after the American Revolution, what you see is you see a political distance being created, but not necessarily a cultural distance. And I think this does go to explain, even though obviously the United States has become a very, diverse country, and that's, for the most part, that's a good thing, in that being American is not an ethnic term. But I think that we need to be honest about that debt, right? That the 13 colonies owed to, whether it be in law or in literature or whatever. And those things continue, right? They do. They continue to affect and influence the United States long after we gain our political freedom, because of all these different ways in which they did certain things that kind of had their origins. So I think all you have to do is look at, why is it that in the United States King Arthur has any appeal? Why Robin Hood? I think any of that still has a lot of staying power in our stories and our own, if you will, maybe our own American traditional legendarium. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe less now, but I think it has been for a long time, that almost kind of a wistfulness or a sense of cultural homesickness. We want to be different. Let's throw that tea overboard. We don't need any more of the British background. We're going to cut the apron strings and be our own country. But Mom could make some pretty good chicken noodle soup, and I kind of miss that. And there's this sense of longing. I'm not some people think I'm an Anglophile because I love British history, but it's not really about being an Anglophile. But I do know that there are a lot of Americans who are quite interested in the royal family, and so why is that? Good grief. There's a Dutch royal family, but how many Americans really know anybody in that royal family?
Queen Wilhelmina.
yeah, exactly. So I think there is something of that here, where Beowulf represents a story that was still accessible to these descendants who had gone to live in a foreign country.
Yeah.
And so that's a good catch.
Yeah. And even an American author like John Steinbeck was working on his own version of the Tale of King Arthur before he died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was unfinished, unfortunately, but it's been published. You can check it out.
And then you have Mark Twain.
Yeah, Mark Twain. He did his own telling of Joan of Arc, which is really interesting. I think, and also Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court.
Yeah.
Would love that book.
Yeah. Good stuff. Wow. Well, we probably should keep on going, huh?
Yeah.
We should probably talk about criticism and interpretation now, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
So it sounds like, Anthony, you're saying that many have only treated Beowulf as a trove for historical facts. Others are like, no, it's mythology, it's legend, it's just kind of fun entertainment. But Tolkien was looking at it specifically as, hey, let's take it for the literary work it is, and what does it tell us about, the story that the poet wanted to tell. And he actually, didn't Tolkien, somewhat controversially, believe that this is a single author, whereas there are a lot of other people who believe that it was multiple authors, right?
I think so, yeah. I believe scholars have come around to his position, but I'm not quite sure.
I think there was actually
That's actually true, because I think something that Brian said, or was it Anthony? No, I think it was Brian, that they studied this at Harvard, and basically the language itself shows it was a single author.
Yeah.
Now, it may have been, the manuscript may have been was definitely copied by two people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's a change
Scribes.
in the writing style.
Right.
Not the style, but the writing itself. But, it looks like a single author, and
Yeah, and as to who the author exactly was, his identity, and it was probably he, remains completely unknown to us, other than some circumstantial evidence that he might have been like maybe a clergyman or a cleric, because at the time, those have been the group of people who would have
Yeah.
only been able to really read and write,
Yeah.
and also just the Christian elements of the poem kind of might give away that fact.
Absolutely, yeah. The poet seems to be coming from a Christian worldview. Do
Yeah.
we know anybody what region? I mean, because at the time, Old English had regional dialects.
Yes.
So which dialect was this copy of Beowulf coming from?
The West Saxon dialects, it was, which is was the language of the kingdom of Wessex, interestingly, and which I believe is the kingdom of Alfred the Great.
That's right.
So that's one reason why some people think that this could have been composed in his court, and especially so since Alfred the Great was a great patron, literary patron of the arts, and specifically of Old English as a literary form.
Can you imagine, Anthony, that perhaps it had been passed on orally for...
colloquialisms from other parts of England?
Colloquialisms.
As just about every other British text contains a mixing, where is that? Page 24.
Go ahead, Chris. I've got that down about the
I
West
need to
Saxon.
start the sentence. It would seem to have been the part of the English temper in its strong sense of tradition, dependent doubtless on dynasties, noble houses, and their code of honor, and strengthened, it may be, by the most inquisitive and less severe Celtic learning, that it should, at least in some quarters, and despite grave and Gallic voices, preserve much from the northern past to blend with southern learning and new faith. So Tolkien here is saying that there is a lot of mixing of different regional aspects into this poem.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't have known that because I don't know Old English.
Do you? I have not read all. I read portions of this, but I've not read the whole thing. And so, Chris, you read a lot of it this morning in preparation. Anthony or Gary, have you had a look at the Monsters and the Critics?
I have not, unfortunately.
Gary, can you hear us?
I can barely hear you now, Brian. I can hear Anthony fine.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to hold it up by my mouth. Can you hear me now, Gary?
Something about, I know anything, something, critique. That's about all I caught.
Well, Brian was asking if you had read Tolkien's essay, The Monsters and the Critics.
I've read some of it. I mean, it was
Okay.
22 pages long. And, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of long for literary criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did see some interesting things. I mean, Tolkien actually thought this was a great work of literature, well, in its own way, literature, you know, poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And some I've got copied some of the comments that he made, but he took quite a bit from to make his own work, which is The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I can see that, you know, exactly. It's, you know, not a secret at all.
Yeah. Let's get back to the interpretation and criticism of Beowulf.
Also, and I had the same feeling. There seemed to be an undercurrent of paganism that the Norse were very warlike and very, I mean, very boastful. And to me, that is not a sign of how Christianity was. But although I do know that Christian kingdoms back in the day fought just as fiercely as anybody else, but you know, showing self-serving heroics or whatever
Yeah.
that Beowulf encountered. You know,
But
the thing about warring
right,
and you know,
yeah.
how you
So,
you
Gary-
gain that was,
Gary?
I thought interesting also.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah,
I was just thinking about, though, I mean, Beowulf certainly is someone who's laying down his life, isn't he, for other people. It's not out of any, he's not going in it for a reward, you know, oh, back in Geatland or Yatland, there isn't a post office with a, you know, 5,000, you know, dollar reward for the capture of Grendel. He's going there in order to fight, and it seems like that is definitely still treasured by these converted Anglo-Saxons. They embrace the Christian faith, but they still have a warrior culture, and they're trying to work out what does that look like. And so they're saying, well, maybe it's about devoting your power and your strength to protecting, and even the concept of a king. A king is literally a son of the people. That is what it means, kinning, son of, or the people of the you know, so it's the son of, or you're related to the people, you protect your relatives, you are looking out for them as if they are your own family. And so I think Beowulf seems to show this. But do we have some other maybe comments, Chris, from the monsters and the critics?
Yes. There's one allegory that Tolkien uses that I think was quite striking. That is Tolkien's opinion on all the people who have tried to pick apart the work from a literary standpoint.
Yeah.
And we know that Tolkien isn't so fond of allegory.
Right.
Yeah.
I would express the whole industry in yet another allegory. I'm going to call this a parable because I think it is a parable. A man inherited a field in which an accumulation of old stone, part of an older hall. Of the old stone, some had actually been used in the building of a house where he actually lived, not far from the old house of his fathers. Of the rest, he took some and built a tower. But his friends coming perceived at once, without troubling to climb the steps, that these stones had formerly belonged to a more ancient building. So they pushed the tower over with no little labor in order to look for hidden carvings and inscriptions, or to discover whence the man's distant forefathers had obtained their building material. Some, suspecting a deposit of coal under the soil, began to dig for it and forgot even the stones. They all said, "This tower is most interesting." And they also said, after pushing it over, "What a muddle this tower is in." And even one man's own descendants, who might have expected to consider what he had been about, were heard to murmur, "He is such an odd fellow. Imagine his using the old stones to just build a nonsensical tower. Why did he not restore the old house? He has no sense of proportion." But from the top of that tower, the man had been able to look out upon the sea. And the concept here is he is criticizing the critics of looking at the individual trees and losing the forest because they miss the entire point because they're looking in all the wrong places.
Interesting.
I love that allegory. That's great.
Yeah, he's saying that the way to appreciate this is appreciation of poetry,
Right.
in its own right, and not getting into the weeds of what language it is and what Middle English or Old
Yeah.
English and what it's about and all this other stuff.
Yeah, basically.
It's poetry.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Basically, what we've been doing in the past half hour is just utter nonsense, according to Tolkien. Well, maybe not utter nonsense, but
Well, I think what he would say is, oh, that's fine, but
that's not the main focus.
read it,
Yeah.
taste it, enjoy it, be inspired by it. Because if you don't climb up to the top of this tower and look out and see the sea, you will have missed what the whole point was of it.
Yeah.
And so we're not just pushing the tower over and looking at the stones. Although I will say two things that just what you shared there, Chris, reminded me of quick, and then back to the rest of you. One is the very name of the hero of the story, Beowulf, as you probably know, is Old English for Beowulf, which is a kenning for bear.
Wow.
Because a bear is a quote-unquote wolf, some creature that's hunting. And what does it hunt? It hunts honey. So it's, I mean, don't picture Winnie the Pooh here, right? But oh, honey. But it's actually a fierce bear that the hero represents, this kind of legendary figure who can come in and overcome this horrible monster that no one else can seem to beat. And I'm thinking, of course, of someone that Tolkien wrote into his stories.
Beorn.
Beorn, that's right.
Yes.
A man who was much like a bear.
Yes.
So I think there's a really cool connection there. And I'm wondering what other connections the rest of you see between Beowulf and how maybe some of Beowulf might have crept into Tolkien's own works.
Well, he specifically says that there are only two significant British dragon tales. Admits that on page 10 here. That's not the right reference. Anyway, the concept of the dragon is definitely here, and you see it in his other works, Gawain and the Green Knight and Farmer Giles and Ham and such.
Yeah.
I think Farmer Giles is an allegory of the opposite of Beowulf. That Beowulf is very dark and weighty and full of destruction, and Farmer Giles is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd probably agree with that.
What other connections?
Between Beowulf and... Oh, Gary, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say that the thing that stuck out to me was, and it's maybe because I don't know the history, but the fascination these people had with rings.
Yeah.
You know, the king in his hall, the Danish king, bestowed rings on his thanes, on his subjects. He was a good king because he did that. Of course, the Lord of the Rings was all about basically it was the quest to destroy the one ring that I guess the equivalent to Satan, which was Sauron, could possess and be who he was. So I thought, all the way around, going through the whole thing was about the rings, and then of course with the dragon itself was, what is this idea that the dragons are jealous of their hoard and they have this affinity towards gold and that type of thing, which of course rings are made of. But I thought that was very, very interesting, and I just wondered where it came from, other than it was probably Scandinavian tradition.
So Smaug, right? You're talking about the dragon in The Hobbit being maybe directly inspired by this from Beowulf?
Brian, did you say something to me? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, his microphone's rather low. So Brian was asking if what you're saying is the dragon Smaug in The Hobbit was inspired by the dragon in Beowulf.
Well, exactly. That's
Yeah.
where we took it from.
Right.
He's got to enter a cave. Well, Bilbo had to enter the mountain. Beowulf had to enter the cave. And there was a huge horde in both cases, and the dragon was there to protect it. And he was very jealous of anybody grabbing anything. In fact, the dragon, Beowulf, he's some old-time thief, grabbed a cup, and he was so angry that he came out and started, destroying the countryside, kind of like the desolation of Smaug.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's definitely. I mean, that was taken, to me, lock, stock, and barrel from Beowulf.
I was thinking of a few other connections I'd like to share, if you guys don't mind. So in the first part, and this is in Seamus Heaney's line 44 of his translation of Beowulf. It talks about actually, I think this is Sheaf. Shield Sheafson.
Yes.
So Shield dies, and they put him in the ship. He was a ring giver, like you were saying there, Gary. But here this king is put on a ship, and precious gear was placed on him, battle tackle, bladed weapons, coats of mail, and then they pushed the ship out. And I was thinking there of Boromir a little bit. Because although they couldn't really do a lot, it was his weapons and his horn. What they are doing there by putting him on the ship and pushing him out definitely is, harks back to that old English and Scandinavian tradition. Even in line 48, they let him drift to wind and tide, bewailing him and mourning their loss. And no man can tell for certain who salvaged that load. And there's a quote in The Lord of the Rings where I think when they're talking about how Boromir, the boat actually, Faramir's dream, Boromir goes past him in the water as though it survived the waterfall. And it says, and maybe went all the way to the sea, that the great sea may have received Boromir, although no one knew for sure because no one ever heard. And it's that same vibe that you have in Beowulf. Line 68. Hrothgar orders this hall to be built. And I'm thinking of Meduseld in The Lord of the Rings when you have the Rohirrim. Tolkien is writing about these people who are, I think, we would all agree, very similar to the Old English at that time, much like Beowulf, and you see not deer, but maybe horses up at the top or whatever. And it says in line 68, he handed down orders for men to work on a great mead hall, meant to be a wonder of the world forever. The actual translation, interestingly, when you look in Tolkien's version of Beowulf, and I hope that we do in the next minute or two read a little bit of Beowulf, because it'd be sad if we, again, knocked the tower over and never stood on it. But in the same... So he translates this. Let's see here. To fashion a hall and a mansion, a mightier house for their mead drinking than the children of men had ever known, and there within would be apportioned all things to young and old, such as God had granted him, save the people's land and the lives of men. Then have I heard that far and wide to many a kindred on this middle earth was that work proclaimed, the adorning of that dwelling of men. And that's Tolkien's translation, where he's more literally translating Midandiad, Middle Earth, whereas Seamus Heaney is translating it as the world. So I thought that was really interesting. When you look at translation, Tolkien favors a more literal sense of Middle Earth, meaning this world, but keeping that sense from the Old English. Seamus Heaney is like, well, it's really referring to the world we live in rather than some other world. So he just goes with world. I thought that was really interesting because what words we choose to use when we translate really do convey different things. And then one more catch. I was just wondering if you guys noticed this or not. In line 94 of Seamus Heaney's Beowulf, listen to this, if I may. I'll go back to could I read just a little bit here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So line 86, he transitions to talking about Grendel. So I'm going to read this here, but I don't want to be the only one, so maybe we could each take a turn. But in Seamus Heaney's Beowulf translation, line 86, then a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. It harrowed him to hear the din of the loud banquet every day in the hall, the harp being struck and the clear song of a skilled poet telling with mastery of man's beginnings, how the Almighty had made the earth a gleaming plain girdled with waters. In his splendor he set the sun and the moon to be earth's lamplight, lanterns for men. I'm thinking the Silmarillion here. And I'm thinking the two pillars of light, because in the very beginning, the Valar set up two pillars, as it were, lanterns. And then later on, Morgoth destroys them. So then the Valar create the two trees, silver and gold, Lorelin and Telperion. And then when Ingoliant kills the trees and sucks the light out of them, from the last fruit of the trees, the Valar create the sun and the moon. And I wonder do you think that this section here might have influenced Tolkien or not?
Maybe. Just maybe. It's hard to tell whether certain influences are intentional or unintentional.
Yeah, subconscious.
And I'm still on the fence on some of the things in which Tolkien may have he's steeped in this universe as he's writing some of his works. And because he's steeped in the universe, it's not an intentional act. It's
I agree.
More of an unintentional byproduct of the culture of the books that he's reading.
Yeah.
I seem to become more convinced over the years that is what is happening instead of something that's intentional.
Yeah.
And his critics will say, "Oh, no, it's intentional because you can see it." And it's not that way at all, I don't think.
Right. Good catch. Yeah, that's a good point. I would agree with that. So, Anthony, would you like to read some of Beowulf here?
Sure.
Yeah, let me give the mic to you.
What section?
Any section you want.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully you can hear me.
Maybe a part with Beowulf in it.
Yes. I think I would like to read what basically what Beowulf says to Hrothgar. And I don't know how much. This won't be long. And
What line is it?
so I'm going to reference the Seamus Heaney translation.
Yep.
This will be line.
It was very, very difficult. Even with my loud voice, it could barely
Yeah,
hear me.
that
So
microphone's
we're
muted.
gonna. It's almost time. We're gonna skip it. We're just passing it back and forth. So we'll have to fix that for next time. Yeah.
Okay. So Beowulf says, "Greetings to Hrothgar. I am
What
hit."
line is this?
This is line 407.
407.
This is when he first greets Hrothgar. I am Hygelac's kinsman, one of his hall troop. When I was younger, I had great triumphs. Then news of Grendel, hard to ignore, reached me at home. Sailors brought stories of the plight you suffer in this legendary hall, how it lies deserted, empty, and useless once the evening light hides itself under heaven's dome. So every elder and experienced councilman among my people supported my resolve to come here to you, King Hrothgar, because all knew of my awesome strength. They had seen me boltered in the blood of enemies when I battled and bound 5 beasts.
Ooh, alliteration.
Yes.
Love it.
Raided a troll nest and in the night sea slaughtered sea brutes. I have suffered extremes and avenged the gates their enemies brought it upon themselves. I devastated them. Now I mean to be a match to Grendel, settle the outcome in single combat. And so my request, O King of Bright Danes, dear Prince of the Shieldings, friend of the people and their ring of defense, my one request is that you won't refuse me, who have come this far, the privilege of purifying Hererot with my own men to help me, and nobody else.
Yeah. Wonderful. You want to see if the others want to read?
Yeah, sure. So Chris or Gary, do you want to read a section off of Beowulf? Or an excerpt?
Unfortunately, I only have Tolkien's
Oh, that could work.
That's
version.
fine.
That'd be perfect, too.
Read one that you enjoyed. They can't hear me.
Yeah, go ahead,
I didn't select a selection, so.
You want to do it now?
If not, that's fine. We can
If not, that's fine. We can
just end it there.
end it there.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass the mic back to Brian now.
Thank you, Anthony, for reading. Well, it is 3:00. I guess it's no accident that we aren't all the way through Beowulf, because this is a massive work. It'd be like saying, let's have one meeting to talk about Shakespeare and its influence on English. And could we barely do that in an hour? No, we couldn't. So we're just scratching the surface. But I hope by reading a little bit of out loud, we can do what Tolkien was talking about there, of being able to appreciate. This would be a poem that would bring. I mean, can you imagine kids saying, "Dad, or Grandpa, tell me the story about Beowulf again," right? Because this is a story that people enjoyed. They love a good, it's everything, right? It's fantasy, it's a murder mystery, it's historical fiction, it's a little bit of the gunslinger coming out of the distance, and kind of shows up in town and gets rid of the, something corrupt. I mean, it's all these kind of wrapped up into one, really. So I can see why it would still have a lot of appeal. Maybe we should just kind of have some final comments on, Tolkien kind of said, we mustn't lose this. This is valuable. It is part of the cultural heritage of English-speaking people, whether you live in India or whether you live in England or whether you live in America or Australia or wherever. Do you agree? What's your case for actually being able to, why bother with Beowulf? What was so attractive to Beowulf to Tolkien, in your opinion?
It's a classic good over evil. Basically, you've got two he starts out with two evil beings, Grendel and his mother, and then it goes along until at the end of his life, Beowulf feels he has to take on the dragon that's laying waste to his kingdom. And so basically, he was I think at the time, maybe the personification of a hero, of good, and all that you should aspire to be.
Yeah, love it. Thank you, Gary. Chris?
Why bother? Well, it's part of challenging yourself into the roots of Middle English and Old English. I think as a professor of Middle English, you have to delve into Old English and go there. And I think that Tolkien was required to, as it's like trying to be Christian without reading the Bible. It doesn't work without going there.
Ad fontes, back to the source.
Yeah.
Good, thank you, Chris. Anthony, why bother?
Do you want me to say it, or do you want the mic? Okay. Yes. Why bother with Beowulf? I would say, well, first of all, it's kind of a cool read. It's written over 1,000 years ago, and it was written in basically the direct ancestor of our modern language. But more importantly, I think it has definitely, I think, a moral value in that, Tolkien, I think, said that the poem's theme is death and how one comes to terms with it and how one faces it. And it also has elements of a heroism and what can you do to make yourself more courageous and more of a person unto others, like, because Beowulf kind of acts rather selflessly in this poem. And so I think some of the values of altruism and courage and just being a good person, despite some of the the violence and bloody combat, can I think resonate with a modern audience, and especially at the end of the poem where there's that scene where I think some of Beowulf's companions abandon him in his fight against the dragon. There's some lessons that can be learned from that. And so I think not only does the poem have great literary value, but it has also some moral and didactic value as well. It can teach one maybe to be a better person in your life, and maybe that's how the audience of 1,000 years ago took it as well. And maybe that was the author's intent.
Yeah.
Sorry if that was
right. Minded the violence, though.
Probably not. No, they probably thought that was very entertaining.
Yeah.
I like Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah, or just watch any movie, modern American movie today. I mean, we love gunfights and So that's my take on it. John Wick, yeah. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded.
No, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I'd like to end with a thought on Beowulf. All of the things you said are really good. Tolkien calls the mead hall a circle of light, and this is I think from a lecture by Verlin Flieger, who's a Tolkien scholar. Anyway, so this is an excerpt from the lecture. Tolkien is a lot less interested in Beowulf's fights with neighboring tribes than he is those against the monsters, against a troll, a sea woman, and a dragon, all of which, Tolkien says, come from deep within Norse and Germanic mythology. They're associated with cold and darkness and wilderness. They are enemies of human values and achievements, and they're reflections of the really, really hostile places in which these people had lived for centuries. In Tolkien's vision, humans create tiny little circles of light. Hrothgar's mead hall is one of those circles of light. Inside each one of those circles, there is laughter, there is music, there is fellowship, but just outside those little circles of light are all of the forces that want to destroy it. And so, in some ways, building a mead hall like the one that Hrothgar builds actually calls Grendel into existence, creates something human, and the hostile universe will try to destroy it. And I thought, you know what? Isn't it ironic that we, to this day, when we're talking about people online who are not thoughtful critics, but just want to be, they're trolls. We call them trolls.
Yes.
And And so that's an interesting reality, but we shouldn't stop creating circles of light. In the world, if you see that it's dark, don't be like Denethor, who says, literally says, of course I'm quoting here from the movie. I can't recall right now whether or not the book he says this, but I think it does, that he chooses to burn in the pagan ways, of ancient men and give up, rather than to be that circle of light against the forces of darkness that are arrayed against Minas Tirith. So I think that's really powerful. And I think that is part of the beauty of this poem, which is really just restating what you guys have already said. So anyway, thank you for being here today. Any last comments before we break? I guess after Beowulf, what comes next, Anthony, on our list of things?
Let's see. I was just going to get to that.
So while he's looking that up, I'm going to ask if Chris or Gary have any last comments before we end today. Just so you know what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is good. This is part of, I think this is one of the major influence amongst all the plethora of influences. I think this is one of the major influences on his legendarium. Definitely.
Right.
I agree, and I just wanted to point out, and this is kind of minor, but he lifted the names Eamor, what is it? Eamor, of the Rohirrim, and his sister
Eomer.
Eowyn, straight from Beowulf.
Yeah, and also a lot. Theoden, I think, is Old English for Lord, or Theod, and so a lot of Rohan and the Rohirrim take elements from Anglo-Saxon. But yeah, thank you all for your comments. And Brian wanted to ask me to look at what's next in terms of literary influences upon Tolkien. So essentially, what we have are the Eddas, the Norse Eddas and sagas. Specifically, we have the Poetic Edda, the Volsunga saga in our list. Also the Mabinogion, which is a Welsh literary work written around 1000 AD. We also have the Kalevala, which basically Finnish oral tales that were compiled by Elias Lönnrot in 1835. And recently I started putting in some more kind of Arthurian romances, such as ones by the French writer Chrétien de Troyes, or Troyes. And we also have the Nibelungenlied, which was also the basis for the famous opera by Wagner, Der Ring des Nibelungen. Then we have some more philosophical influences, I think, that we can spot in Tolkien, particularly Thomas Aquinas, who is a Catholic theologian and philosopher. Being that Tolkien was a Catholic himself, I'm sure he sort of incorporated subconsciously some Catholic elements into his work, and he often said so himself. I also put down Dante for, of course, his Divine Comedy, again, which shows sort of a poetic and Catholic influence on Tolkien's works.
So basically medieval.
Yeah,
We're
medieval.
going to medieval now.
Do you want me to continue? Or?
I think that's probably as far as we can get next month, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So,
That is quite a list.
Yeah.
well, I think what we'll have to do is we'll have to work through chronologically and see how far we get. Probably, I'm thinking probably 3 works is maybe as far as we'll get, but next month. So let's keep an eye out for the emails. But otherwise, we want to wish you all well. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gary. And until next month, which will be March 11th, when we meet next, Namarie.
Namarie.
My
this off here?
Yeah, I think.
What do we do here to stop the live stream?